This is Future Fork, a show that explores the world of food and the decisions we can make today that will shape our future. On the show, you'll hear from innovators in the food space. We'll have disruptive conversations with people from around the globe who are taking the lead on topics like food sustainability, ending world hunger, food security, and so much more. I'm your host, Paul Newnham. In this episode, we're talking to Dorothy Shaver, the Global Food Sustainability Director at Unilever. Dorothy has worked at the intersection of nutrition, health, and sustainability for over 20 years. In today's conversation, we dive deep into the challenges and opportunities of creating sustainable food systems at a global scale. You'll hear Dorothy explain how she's working to make nutritious, sustainable food accessible and desirable for everyone, the ambitious goals she set for the next 12 months, and she'll also share practical ways that industry professionals and consumers can support the transition to more sustainable food systems. Let's get into it. Dorothy, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Sounds exciting.
It's super exciting. So what we might do is let's start with, how did you get into the world of global food sustainability?
Well, it started on the 4th of December, 1980.
We're going right back.
I went right back just a couple of years. No, so I've always been really, really interested in food. Growing up, we had an Italian nanny who used to cook with us, and I was always really interested on the impact of food on the way that they feel, on their health, on the planet, right from a really pretty young age. And it started as my mom was pretty picky about what we ate, and my nanny wanted to do things like sugar-coated carrots and beefy meatballs and lots of pasta. And there was a bit of back and forth on that growing up. And then my father got diagnosed with heart disease, and he could no longer eat beef. At the time, that was the recommendation. And I thought that was really interesting. So we thought of different ways to make foods. And then I ended up working pretty hard to try to trick people into eating different foods that were in different foods. So that was from a pretty young age. I had a pretty large group of friends who were football playing boys. And at every event we went to, I made a point to put crushed up flax seeds into chocolate chip cookies, or to make lemon tofu cheesecake and these types of things. And that was quite a few years ago now. And from that, I really determined that it would be great for me to become a dietitian. So I became a registered dietitian. That was my first part of my career. I thought it was going to be like fun. I thought it was going to be like going to school to do things like experimenting with tofu and cheesecake and things like this. But it turned out it was biochemistry and biology. So then I had to have a pre-med degree to become a registered dietitian, because I became a clinical dietitian. So that's something you didn't actually know about me, is that my degree is actually pre-med with a focus in dietetics, because you have to, of course, learn how to do all the tube feeding and the dialysis and all of these things from a medical nutrition therapy point of view. So absolutely loved it. I worked really hard, became a registered dietitian, worked as a clinical dietitian for quite some time. But even in that time, I loved working in the kitchen. I loved really experimenting with things. Part of my first job was that I worked with a dementia ward. So everybody on the floor had dementia, and they really struggle with eating the same foods that they used to eat. And really, some people, when they go through that process of brain deterioration leading to dementia with older age, start to only like certain tastes or certain foods. So at that time, you get flagged if somebody goes really underweight or overweight from the government. And so it was my ambition as the clinical dietitian to make sure that happened to nobody. So for some people, I had to really play around with what was happening. So with this one woman, we put chocolate sauce over everything she ever ate, and she very quickly gained a lot of weight. And for another person, we sat them with somebody who didn't eat as much to get them to eat less. So I always kind of loved these types of experimentation on how do your surroundings impact the way that you're eating, and also how does food impact the way that you perform, the way you feel, the way that your body works. So I was really interested in that. So I did that for a while. At the time, I was working for Sodexo, of course, as my first job. And then I moved over to a really cool job, which was called Healthability, which was about 7 different dimensions of health and how to really utilize those 7 different dimensions to improve people's lives that were moving from living on their own to moving to more assisted living. So it was like the beginning of kind of the geriatric phase of people's lives and how to really preserve their livelihoods, their well-being, their social ability, their health ability in that time. So I worked for Sodexo, and that was a 1-year program where I went around and trained different people all over the United States on how to do that with these different groups of people as they aged, which was really interesting. At the time, I was also on the side a homeopathic dietitian and a yoga teacher, so it went well with all of those spaces. And then I moved on to become a retail dietitian, which I absolutely loved as well, where I kind of had my own program called Mission Nutrition with Kroger, where I did, again, different experimentations to help people to eat differently, like food tours, walking people with diabetes around the store and talking about what foods they should choose more of and less of, and being able to track what they were purchasing and being able to see the impact of these different programs on what they were choosing from the grocery store. So that was a really cool experimentation that I was able to do with them. I was in the advertising team, so I was on TV every day, and I was writing articles and really moving people to eat healthier foods and choose healthier foods in the grocery store, which I absolutely loved. And at that time, I really started to think about how do we intersect food that's good for people and good for the planet? Because a lot of the time it's really seen as different. And also I should actually say, how do we intersect foods that's good for the people, good for the planet, and good for your taste buds? Because I think also there's always this association, and I personally have kind of a little prickle about it because as somebody who's a dietitian now working in food sustainability, nobody really wants to eat with you because they think you're only going to eat like slimy tofu or like uncooked spinach. And I probably do eat that, but I'm pretty holistic in what I like to eat and my flavor profile. And I really tried to move that into the work that I was doing in Kroger. And from there, I really started to learn more about the food companies and how to make an impact through food companies, the big, huge footprint of food companies. I loved working for Kroger. I worked in the Mid-Atlantic region, which was across 7 states, but it still wasn't going further into really shifting the formulation of foods, which I thought was really an interesting space from both a planetary boundaries and a health perspective. So that's when I moved into Unilever. And I worked for SlimFast at first, actually, which Unilever, of course, doesn't own anymore, but I am utilizing my skills from that space in the Horlicks brand, which we now have acquired in India. So I am still proud of that whenever I can bring up what I did back then, which wasn't 1980, but was a few years after that. So I then worked on SlimFast and tea. And then I have to say, I'm very open about this. So I'll tell you that I was living in New York and I was liking my life, but I really didn't like the job. I thought it was so boring. So I went to my boss and I was like, okay, this is so boring. Like, you're not utilizing my skills. I mean, I was on TV, I was writing articles, I was doing all these experimentation. Like, you're not utilizing very well. And he said, okay, well, there's a really cool position in the Netherlands that maybe you could try. So as a typical American, I went and Googled Netherlands. And I was like, oh, that's a cute little place.
I love it.
That's a cute spot. And then I moved over to the Netherlands and did some really cool programs with our global team. So our global team, of course, was and is based in the Netherlands. And I was in research and development and really started to recognize more and more that, in Unilever at the time, we had launched the first Unilever Sustainable Living Plan. And in it was goals on human health, goals on planetary health, but they weren't intertwined. And at that time, I was like, we're really going about this in the wrong way. Like, how do we really tie these together? So that was something that I really started to focus on back then, which was 12 years ago now, where I was really trying to train our group of 175 nutritionists around the world. We had quite a few then, on how to do that intersect and then how to market that back to the marketing team. Because in Unilever, the marketing team basically sets the strategy, and research and development and nutritionists, they kind of help that strategy work. So I did that for a while, and then I moved over to the marketing team. I worked on fortification in Nigeria, which was a project that I absolutely loved. And as part of that, really started to work on how do we lower the environmental impact while increasing the nutrients. And from there, I moved to the marketing team. Then I moved over to the marketing team because I was like, hey, I want to be in charge of things. And in Unilever, you're in charge of things when you're in the marketing team, in my view. And so then I led the thought leadership piece that we worked on together, Paul, which is the Future 50 Foods, which is absolutely the intersect of foods that are good for people and good for the planet. And I think the great thing about that was, it not only kind of catapulted me into the external world and also put Knorr on the map in the external world as a thought leader, it also really started to get people to think about that, right? It's only 50 of the many foods we should eat more of for the health of people and the planet. But I feel like that was really the first time that people were like, oh, wow. And that was even astonishing to me because I was like, oh, I didn't know people didn't think about these two things together. But I guess we learn more and more that as humans, we like single thoughts, not multiple thoughts and system thoughts. You're different, I'm different than that. But most people and the way that our brains work is one. So that was a really interesting phase to really go through, how do we tie these two things together? What's the criteria for it? How do we make sure that we integrate flavor? How do we get these into recipes, working with Sodexo, working with our food service part of our business? How do we integrate all of this stuff so that people feel good about what they're eating and it's also better for the planet? So I did that in the marketing team, and I also helped the company move from working on our sustainable sourcing agenda into moving on our regenerative agriculture practice implementation agenda, which at the time I ignorantly thought was just like, oh, we'll just move our sustainable sourcing to regenerative agriculture practices. But now realize it's quite complicated. So from there, I was working in the marketing team for Knorr. And then we decided that maybe it would be good to have somebody across all of the brands really focused on sustainability in the business group. So that's where I moved to 3 years ago in January, believe it or not. And that's how I got here. So that's the really long answer. The short answer is that I've always thought that there was a huge intersect between human health, planetary health. Of course, that also goes into livelihoods, culture, who we are. And I really feel that food can really fix the world if we did it right. And moving into a position where I can really work on the intersect of health and sustainability and brands, I think is kind of the perfect trifecta to make the impact that I want to make.
For anyone who doesn't really know who Unilever is, how would you describe Unilever and who are they?
So Unilever has a huge array of products that are available in more than 190 countries. So I think it's like 1 in 3 people use a Unilever product every day. The foods business group is one of 5 business groups. So we have home care, personal care, which probably is the one that people know the most, which is a lot of Dove, of course, people probably know that. Then we have beauty and well-being, and then we have ice cream, and then we have foods. So there are 5 business groups. I've always worked on foods. So I've always been in the foods business group. At one point we were foods and ice cream, and that was fun. But now I'm foods. And some of the big food brands that we have, of course, are Hellmann's and Knorr and Horlicks in India. And then, of course, we have multiple local brands as well.
It's good to hear a bit about the excitement around the role. And I think one thing that's always interesting is thinking about how these roles evolve. So what's something that you would say has evolved since when you started to now what you're doing and working on?
So I started this role and I felt like more of like a pioneer role, right? So we launched the regenerative agriculture practices in 2021. In beginning of 2022 was when I started in this role, and it was very much a pioneering role, like really trying to figure out the external and the internal environment that was necessary for us to operationalize and implement regenerative agriculture. At first, I thought, we can do this. Unilever has been working in sustainable sourcing for more than 15 years. We just got to topple this on top of it. Well, that isn't the case, if anybody's wondering if you can just move from sustainable agriculture to regenerative agriculture practices implementation. It's far more complicated than that, actually. For basically probably the first year and a half of this role, it was more of like a pioneering, moving forward, like figuring out internally, who do we need? What expertise do we need? What positions do we need? What mechanisms do we need? What partnerships do we need who are real experts in this stuff? What suppliers will come with us, which suppliers won't? How do we set up those contracts? How do we really work with NGOs? How do we work with coalitions? And that was really the first year and a half. How do we get our words out there? What words do we even say? How do we really move this forward? And the first year and a half was very much focused on pioneering and implementing regenerative agriculture internally and externally. With our leadership changes and also with me coming like a little bit further over that pioneering space, and now it's pretty much going, right? We have our strategy in place, we have people in place, we have implementation partners, we have our suppliers on board. That's pretty much going. Of course, I still work on it for quite a bit of my time, but kind of about before this time, maybe September of last year, 2023, we said, okay, let's shift this to cover all of the areas and really kind of move to be on all of the areas around sustainability, really looking at what we need to do in plastics, major challenges in that because of food grade recycled plastics aren't allowed or not available. And also, of course, moving into kind of the different areas that we're doing on eco design, which is, of course, our product design principles to have lower carbon footprint from our products, in addition to regenerative agriculture. and also leading, of course, the policy advocacy space when it comes to particularly regenerative agriculture and other areas. So the role has expanded, but it's also become more operationalized, more kind of like straightforward tracking, strategic, and less kind of entrepreneurial. And I think all the roles that I have actually done well in, and every role that I've had in Unilever is the first time the role ever existed for my whole career. And I've never been in a role for longer than 3 years in my life. So maybe I could stretch this one a little longer because it shifted so much, but I really like the entrepreneurial space. And now I'm doing a lot of kind of tracking, moving things forward, moving the needle a little bit, putting things in different formats. Like, oh, here's a PowerPoint. Oh, no, it should be an Excel. Oh, it should be a Word document. So I'm doing a lot of that. But of course, I'm still doing a lot externally. So I've now, of course, established myself externally, as you know quite well. So I feel that some of that work's done, but I have to keep that going and make sure that our business leaders are coming along to unstick anything that needs to be unstuck. So I think that's really how it's really evolved. But if someone does take a role like this, you have to be really open to it evolving. You also have to be really knowledgeable of yourself that my main goal in this role, in all my roles, is to make as much of an impact as I can. And that goes from, of course, improving our products, improving our impact on people and also on the planet from a healthy products, healthy diets perspective, and also from a planetary impact, but also to be a really good leader. And that's a big part that people don't talk about so much when it comes to sustainability. And you and I have never talked about that either, is that the only way all of this stuff happens is if you are somebody that is able to catalyze change internally and able to motivate people to really want to basically like be you. And so many times people say, I want to work in sustainability. And I think, oh, you don't, but I'm happy that you think that. So, because I think that's a big part of the role is that like, there's only me. And then I have to catalyze the leaders. I have to really get other people to really get it into their business strategy. And I do feel like with this shift in leadership that we've had over the past few months, I was getting a little shaky on it. I think that, that was also reflected externally with the perception that we were giving outside, which I didn't get because I've been in it in the whole narrative shift. And I really think it's the right way forward. It's really about integrating it really into our business strategies. And it really is there. I mean, regenerative agriculture and plastics is front and center of the food strategy. We see it as a business imperative. I don't have to say it all the time. It's said by so many other people. It's part of our strategies when it comes to our condiment strategy. So it's part of the strategy now. So I feel pretty accomplished in that sense, but you still have to continue to motivate, to catalyze change, to make it really simple for people and for them to see which part of the system that they can impact. And not everybody has to understand system change, even though we want everybody to. That's too complicated sometimes. So you have to make it relevant to people internally, just like you do externally.
So in the next 12 months, what's some of the big goals or focus going to be?
From a policy advocacy perspective, it's a pretty big year, 2025. As you may know, in Europe, of course, the cap will come out. We'll be able to have time to have some input on that. And I think that's a major piece is, we really need to be able to say what we think needs to be in cap. Of course, cap is the whole incentivization program it's a common agricultural policy in Europe. And that basically is about what incentives, the farmers in the agricultural system get. And we really need to shift that to be outcome focused. But in order to do that, there needs to be some major alignment and synergies within the industry around what do we do to measure, report, and verify on agricultural improvements? How do we pull it back to say this was responsible for this when, it's a quite volatile system that we're looking at. We're looking at people and we're looking at nature and we're looking at climate change. Like there couldn't be more volatile system that you're looking at, which is probably why you and I think it's so fascinating, but others maybe don't because it is really hard to operationalize that. It's really hard to make that into a program and to make it outcome focused, to measure it, to report on it, to verify it, to have everybody do the same thing. But that's what needs to happen. So I think one big one is really how do we shift those literally millions of dollars of incentives in Europe to be really focused on the right agricultural systems and practices. And I think humans make up everything. So when we think about, these system changes that need to happen, if we can really shift it in Europe, of course, as an incentivization program and in government funding perspective from an agro-food space is the leader, right? So if we can get them to kind of really move in the right direction, I'm hoping that catalyzes shifts in other places. India, huge food exporter. and is very much kind of in danger as a result of some of the systems that they have put in place, which of course they thought was the right thing, right? To allow everybody to have water, pesticides, and fertilizers to feed the immensely growing population, right? Of course, that's what should happen. But now we're realizing that that's not the right thing. So how do we help the farmers, mostly smallholder farmers in India, go through that transition to enable that shift? So I think that's a big thing for 2025 as well. I mean, obviously in the United States, we need to see what do we do to really get in there as an industry and really utilize this time of potential turmoil in the United States government to see how things can change and to see how we can influence that change. And I think that, we need to get the Farm Bill across in the United States, and it needs to include crop insurance. So that's a big one as well. So those three things from an advocacy perspective, I think. There's two other things that need to happen. We need the Cargills, the Bungys, the ADM, the Louise Dreyfus, we need them as suppliers of huge amounts of ingredients, far more than Unilever or, us and others that we're partnering with, Nestle's and Diageo and PepsiCo, bigger than all of us. They need to see the value in regenerative agriculture. And they need to be the ones that work with implementation partners and farmers. And we're doing that very much in partnership with them, right? We have a great partnership with Bunge. We have a great partnership with ADM and PepsiCo in the United States, but they're pocketed. And the only way to get out of those pockets is to get these big, huge players to really be the initiators of the process. And then to come back to us to say, hey, all you off-takers, what do you need to do in order to get us to shift all the rice in the United States, not just our little bit of rice from rice sides, all the rice to be grown following regenerative practices, which it should, understanding the impact of rice, which I won't get into either, but that needs to happen at that level. We really need the operators and really the suppliers to really go forward to figure this out and to really see the value of it from a true value perspective for their business and really shift and optimize the whole system. So I'm really, really hoping that that shift starts to happen. It has a bit, but it really needs to move quite a bit.
Can I ask you, in that shift, who do you think and where do you think that needs to be paid for from? So there's obviously a cost involved in this shift. Often the customer ends up paying. But what's your thoughts on this? How should industry engage in that shift?
First and foremost, I'm not going to get into the true value of food, but unfortunately, and fortunately, depending on how you look at it, the eaters or shoppers or consumers or customers, however you call people.
Yeah. People. Yeah. People. Yeah.
Let's just say, people don't end up paying for it all the time because the system's all messed up. So there's many problems in the payments across the whole value chain of food, which we know about, but that's a different topic. So let's get to that one. So who pays for it? So if I was going to design the system, I would say that the supplier pays the transition. And the reason why I say that is because I'm a believer in it, right? So if I'm the supplier and I give 6 companies rice, let's just go with rice. I give 6 companies rice and I'm the supplier and I can price that at what I think it's worth, first and foremost, right? Let's think about that. So I get to price it for what it's worth. But then I pay for that 3 to 5 year transition for all those farmers to go through it. If I do it right and if I do it well, I am safeguarding the future of that crop. I am safeguarding the livelihoods of those farmers and my yield's higher. So I'm making money on both sides because then I can also say to the people that I'm selling to for a very short amount of time, I have this exclusive rice that you can talk about lowers your carbon footprint, gets you closer to your net zero, gets you closer to your environmental impact goals, for a short amount of time. Because over time, if that happened and if the suppliers saw it, conventional agriculture would move to regenerative agriculture and the playing field would be even. For a little while, if you were the first supplier to move and really move, you could really make some money off of it. But you have to pay for that transition because if it's done well, you're going to benefit. If it's done well, and if you believe in ecosystem like that, there's a lot of ifs there, right?
Lots of ifs.
That's what I would say.
So what was the other one that you wanted to mention?
I already mentioned governments. So then the other payment person is governments, because then the government should pay to secure the supply of the food that they are feeding their people with and exporting, because that's a big amount of cash for the country. And if you were to say to a government, you're no longer going to be able to export and you're not going to be able to feed the people that are in your country, that's a huge, huge, huge expense to the government. And I don't think that governments understand the risk that's at hand here when the soil turns to sand, which is happening quite rapidly. So that's also part of it, is that the maintenance cost should be incentivized. The outcomes and impact should be incentivized by the government so that the farmers continue to pay it. And also the crop insurance piece, because if a supplier goes to a farmer and says, let's go through this transition, and they say, wait, I might go down in yields, I might lose a season of a crop or something like this, a harvest, then that they need to be insured for that as well. And I think that should come from the government. That's who pays. Tick back to the other ones, retailers. Now, I have a soft spot for retailers because I loved my job working in a retailer. And I think that their ability to influence, from a positive perspective, influence shopping habits and purchasing habits significantly, and that can significantly shift. And the other thing that retailers can do is if they think they're ever going to make their net zero commitments, then retailers need to say, we are going to promote and sell only the lowest carbon footprint SKU or product profile within your kind of set, right? So if there's like 25 different brands of mayonnaise, and they say, well, Unilever's been doing well on regenerative agriculture, and so on the impact of implementing regenerative agriculture, so their carbon footprint's lower. Also, they did great. They've changed their packaging. They've lowered the amount of ingredients that have a high carbon footprint. There's the lowest. So we're going to actually promote that one, and we're not going to promote the other ones. And then if they sell more of the ones that have the lowest carbon footprint, then their footprint will go down, our footprint will go down, and everybody wins. But that has to be led by retailers. And there are some things, little things coming through, right? There's some retailers that say they're not going to have products on their shelf unless they're grown right. Or they try to do these restrictions, but they don't think of the system. So I think they could really be more strategic as well.
You mentioned about soil turning to sand. You mentioned about the real impact around regenerative ag. What's a practical thing that somebody can hear about how you guys have invested in regenerative ag?
Well, we have 25 projects in ground in US, Europe, Latin America, India, across our largest crops, right? So we have tea and coffee in India. We also have lots of tomatoes in India. We have lots of vegetables in the United States and in Europe, and also some grains in the United States and Europe, and also some seed oils, of course. That's like rapeseed and soy and those types of things, right? So our strategy is really focused on our largest volume ingredients, as you would imagine, so that we can make the highest impact. Of course, we have a lot of tomatoes because we have the Knorr brand and we have a lot of tomato soups. And we work together with our tomato supplier, Agraz, who's based in southern Spain, and with the farmers who are based there. We've been working with them for some time now, I guess 2.5 years, as long as we've been doing the projects. I mean, southern Spain's struggling a ton, right? From huge amount of winds, from sometimes floods, sometimes droughts, like all over the map. And they're, used to having a pretty stable climate for quite some time. So they've been growing these tomatoes fine for quite some time. But they didn't have any water, so we implemented a drip irrigation system so they can use significantly less water, reuse the water, and recycle the water, of course, to be used in the future. So that was a big impact that we did with them. We also shifted their fertilizers to be only organic fertilizers, and we also implemented cover cropping to save the soil between harvests. As a result of that, the farmers say that they had a significantly increase in yield, and they also saw better quality tomatoes. So when I went there, I pulled up in the car, and other people go and help them. And they were like, Dorothy, get out of the car. And they were showing me this new bird that was flying. And the reason why, of course, the new bird was flying was because they had more worms in the ground. And the more worms in the ground obviously meant healthier soil. And that's really the way that they judge how their crop is improving. So I thought that was really pretty magical, right? Because we have all these measurements and we made them write down all these things and use computers in a place where there's no Wi-Fi and so on and so forth. But the real stuff is when they're able to say, look, we had tomatoes when others didn't, and that did actually happen in 2022. They had 37% less tomatoes than they did the year before in 2022, coming from southern Spain specifically. But also, we need to think about these anecdotal things where they see more birds and they see more worms and they find the soil more healthy. So I'm quite proud of that program, but I'm even more proud of it because what also happened was other farmers that were outside of the tomatoes that we're growing came and saw how well their tomatoes are growing. And then the farmers that grow some of our tomatoes, they then helped the other farmers in the area to grow their tomatoes differently. So I love that story personally because, of course, I was there for the bird. Now, whether or not they trained a bird to get up in the sky at that time or not, but they're also really proud of it, right? So the farmers love to talk about it. And I think that's a really great program. And that was one of our first programs that we did in regenerative agriculture. And of course, I'm bragging about the one that's really working. And there are others that aren't. And we've had some setbacks as well. So I don't want to act like they're all working that way. I just love that bird story.
So one thing I was just going to ask you about is, in terms of consumers and industry professionals, what would you say to them if they're really wanting to support this transition to more sustainable food systems? What would you say they should be focused on?
So just people that are buying food, we're at the stage right now where I think it's time for people to just start to wonder about how their ingredients are grown. Let's just go with that. Like, let's just go with wonder. Like, start to wonder, and not from a political point of view, from a point of view of what do I think is a high quality food? And what do I think is a high quality ingredient? And if you were to ask me, I know I'm not probably a regular shopper or whatever, but if you were to ask me, I wouldn't say that a high quality ingredient that goes into a high quality product that I want to feed my family, my friends, is one that when it's grown, it destroys the soil, it takes away the butterflies from the sky, it ruins the future of that ground so it can't grow food in the future. It's not able to withstand any climate changes, putting our food, of course, at risk, which then, of course, will increase the price of my food. That's not a high quality ingredient. So beyond, having the right texture, the right flavor, the right nutritional value, it also needs to be grown in the right way so that I can be sure that it is really a high quality ingredient. It's really hard to get metrics around the connection of the way that we grow foods and nutrients, the way that we grow foods and quality. But I think from our mindset, we can start to think about, what is a high quality food and what do I want to support? And I want to support high quality ingredients that will be available for the short term, the long term, and enable birds to fly, butterflies, and of course, worms underground, because we are helping that soil to thrive to be able to grow more food in the future. So I think let's just start to wonder about it. Like, that's the first thing, and ask questions about how is this grown? What do I need to think about? What do I need to look for? And hopefully some of the big brands and the small brands will help people to disseminate this, but it is really challenging when people don't wonder yet. So that's really the thing. So I think let's start to wonder. The other thing that I would just ask everybody that's working in this space is to be as transparent as you can. And Paul, you and I know each other for quite some time, and you know that I am quite transparent. And the reason for being so transparent isn't because, I want to tattle on a competitor or feel better or any of this stuff. It's so that I can learn from other people's mistakes so that our teams and our suppliers and our partners on the ground don't have to do what others did, because we don't have time to all make the same mistakes. So we need to help each other in how do we really shift conventional agriculture to be regenerative and to bring things back to life that unfortunately we have damaged over time with the way that we've grown food unintentionally. And how do we learn from each other? And I don't mean like I need a whole data set. It would just be nice if we were more transparent. I mean, I know I just told this flighty, wonderful story about a bird, but I can also tell you a story that would really help you learn, but that one also helps you learn. But that's my biggest thing right now. I don't really need to get on stage and talk about all the amazing things everybody's doing just to pound on my chest. We need to start to shift our narrative to be come along with me and learn from me.
So one thing that I like to ask people in closing is a recurring question that we can all relate to. And you've just talked a little bit about some of the things, the wonder. But what's one thing that you're loving to eat at the moment? What's something that you're thinking about and eating and enjoying?
Oh my gosh, I had so much good food lately, but I'm going to say, okay, fresh pumpkin. So as an American, I grew up with pumpkins as like jack-o'-lanterns on Halloween that you carve and then you throw away, and canned pumpkin for your pumpkin pie. So those are the two types of pumpkins that I know. But turns out in other parts of the world, they actually in season eat pumpkins, and all you got to do is roast it. You can actually make pumpkin pie with fresh pumpkin. I did it a little bit more challenging. Reach out to me if you need some tips. And then on Saturday, I had friends over, and there were like 6 of us or 7 of us, and I just roasted a whole pumpkin. Then I could socialize while I roasted my pumpkin in the background. And it was fantastic. And even the seeds are delicious. So that's my latest discovery, which sounds so ignorant, but I'm really quite proud of it.
Do you eat the skin or not?
Some of my friends did. I ate a little bit of it because it does have some fiber in it, but you can eat the skin. I'm sure there's something interesting you could do with it. You probably like roast it again with like olive oil and salt and pepper and maybe some Nor seasoning. And then you can cook it for a little while, make it into like a pumpkin skin chip. That's my next thing. Let's see how I can use the whole pumpkin.
Do you have a lot of Knorr seasoning in your kitchen?
I have a lot of Nor seasonings in the kitchen. And I have to tell you that people think of it as only bouillons, but I actually like the ones that are like shakeable. There's like a chili, rosemary, interesting little combination that I like. I have to say, I do like those.
Well, Dorothy, it's been a pleasure to talk to you. You've got an infectious storytelling approach. And so thank you for joining our show.
Thank you for having me.
You've been listening to Future Fork, a show that explores the world of food and the decisions we can make today that will shape our future. Future Fork is produced by Disruptive Consulting Solutions and supports the SDG2 Advocacy Hub. For more info, head to the website futureforkpodcast.com. This show was produced with strategy and production support from Wavelength Creative. So you don't miss an episode of Future Fork, make sure to subscribe to or follow the show in your podcast app. And while you're there, leave us a 5-star review. It really helps others find the show. I'm Paul Newnham, and I'll see you in the next episode.